Now, we might not say this out loud very often, but many of us share this quiet belief of, this is my situation. I should be able to handle it myself. Asking for help, being vulnerable, it's uncomfortable, maybe even a little scary. I want you guys to take a moment and think about a situation where you were overwhelmed, where you were drowning, and you didn't ask for help. Why was that? Was it because of your pride? Maybe you didn't want to burden others. Or maybe you felt like no one would understand you. For me, it was always a mix of those things. And in those moments, I always felt like I was being dragged out to sea. Something was pulling at me beneath the surface. Yet, on the outside, I always acted like everything was just fine. Everything was A-okay. But here's something that I learned. So I served in the United States Navy for 5.5 years, and I've been involved in numerous exercises and numerous drills. But the most important one is something called the man overboard drill. You see, on a US Navy vessel, when a sailor falls overboard, everything stops. All hands begin to move. Eyes start scanning the water. Rescue boats are mobilized. A massive rescue effort begins. Every single resource is invested to save that one sailor's life. Because the expectation is no one can survive out in the ocean on their own. These drills, they save lives. But also they remind us of something very important, and that is calling for help when you're in crisis. That could be the difference between life and death. For much of my life, I was the sailor who didn't call out for help. In fact, as a child, I was so hesitant about calling for help that I've almost drowned 3 times. You probably would have thought that I've learned the first 2 times. But beyond the water, it continued into my mental health. In the Navy, with the Marine Corps, even after I got out of the service. I always felt like asking for help was a sign of weakness, and I didn't want to burden anybody. In basic training, whenever a recruit would start to struggle, what we call recruit division commander would come up to our face and go, "Suffer in silence, you." And the message was clear. There's very, very little room for vulnerability in the United States military. And that mindset did follow me to my first duty station at Naval Medical Center, San Diego. I was fortunate enough to be assigned to the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, which is NICU for short. We pride ourselves with taking care of the tiniest, cutest babies. I can remember many memories, holding babies that weren't even bigger than my forearm, watching their heart rate steady as they wrapped their tiny little hands around my pinky. We were there for the very first chapter of their lives. We were there to help them close out that chapter, that stressful chapter. All of us providing our support and seeing parents walking out, tears of joy, finally being able to take their baby home. But unfortunately, not all stories at the NICU had a happy ending. Sometimes despite how hard we fought, and sometimes despite how hard their little bodies fought, well, it wasn't enough. And those are the ones I still think about to this day. I never talked about those little ones. I always buried the grief. I buried the pain. I buried the thoughts of self-doubt. Depression had become and flooded in my mind. I had become the sailor overboard. After the NICU, I was sent to Camp Pendleton, California to report to 1st Marine Division at an infantry battalion, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines. For most corpsmen, that is the ultimate goal, becoming an FMF corpsman, being able to earn the title of Doc. But the transition for me, well, let's just say it was a little rough. I definitely did not fit the mold of a FMF corpsman. You see, with Victor units or the infantry battalions in the Marine Corps, most of the guys you'll see, big burly dudes, lifting heavy weight, chugging beers, love shooting guns. But me, well, I'm a lifelong Buddhist. I don't like chugging beer. I love indulging in fruity cocktails once in a while. I didn't do anything heavy weightlifting or anything like that. I was playing Pokemon Go at Balboa Park, just walking around minding my business. But still, I showed up. I took responsibilities above my pay grade and earned top-notch evaluations, but ultimately, the thing that I gained, which was the most important to me, was the respect of my fellow sailors and my fellow Marines. I had become Doc. Around this time, I had silently been seeking mental health treatment and felt some sort of shame behind it. At least I did until HM1 pulled me in. Now, let me give you some background on HM1 real quick. HM1 was the definition of a salty sailor. And I'm gonna embarrass you real quick because I know you're gonna be watching this later. HM1 was a veteran from the Afghanistan war, and every time he walked into the room, he was a respected leader. First impressions of him was the first day, I was sitting down, minding my business, kind of smiling. He walks into the room, he's like, "What are you smiling for?" I'm like, "Oh, HM1, I'm just a smiley guy, you know?" He's like, "That's gonna change real quick," and just storms out the room, right? But here it was, sitting in his office, and he told me that he himself had sought help as well. And this affected me greatly. Now, it didn't affect me. It didn't fix everything, but it reminded me that I wasn't alone. Maybe I wasn't that broken. Despite this, the thoughts of anxiety, depression, self-doubt, they continue to fight me in my head every single day. I would try to fight against those thoughts by working as hard as I can to prove to those damn thoughts that they weren't gonna win this battle. But one day, the negative thoughts just stopped in my mind. Because that was the morning I decided that I was gonna end my life. I was hospitalized, finally receiving the intensive psychiatric help I needed. My chain of command was absolutely wonderful. They were very supportive. And they made the difficult decision to hold me back from the upcoming deployment that I was planning to go on. At the time, I felt like I was being punished for seeking mental health, finally taking care of myself. And then the pandemic hit. During the final months and months after I left the military, I was assigned to help out in the COVID-19 pandemic. I was giving everything I had every single day to patients, to supporting our staff, to just fighting the chaos that was the pandemic. But inside, I was breaking. And leaving the military only amplified these negative thoughts. I'd lost my structure. I'd lost my team. I was floating in the middle of the ocean by myself with no help in sight, it felt like. At least until something kind of shifted, the tide shifted. Two of my friends, Trajan and Sarah, they saw right through me. And as soon as I recognized that something was wrong, they weren't gonna let me go. They weren't gonna let me go until I finally acknowledged what was going through my head. They helped keep me stable. But the person who surprised me the most in support was my father. My father was a 31-year Navy veteran who served in Vietnam. He was also a man who, once upon a time, was quite skeptical of mental health issues. And yet, this old, crusty, salty sailor walked up to me one day and said, "Son, you need to get help." And initially I resisted. I was scared. I'd heard all these stories about 22 Day and everything like that. But then I realized something. It's one thing to see the life preserver within your grasp, but it's another one to actually hang on to it for a little bit. I finally started going towards the VA. I started getting treatment, medication therapy, and a sense of community became my pillars to helping me stay afloat. And slowly, I remained staying on the surface. Later on, I was fortunate enough to become employed with a brand new hospital that was opening up an emergency room right down the street from my parents' house. And I met some wonderful people. At work, I had people like my director, Casey Carroll, who taught me that vulnerability was not a weakness, but rather a strength. And my nurses and techs at the ER, well, they had just gone through, for the past 2 years, a pandemic with no support, no time to really process anything. And they opened up to me about their mental health struggles. Here I was thinking that these guys were just built different, that these guys were probably perfect. But in reality, they too had been suffering from mental health, and some of them have been seeking treatment. And once I had that realization, I felt like I was able to swim for myself a little bit. I had coworkers who would not only listen, I had coworkers who would stand by me. And for the first time, I felt like I didn't have to fight alone. Looking back, there are 3 lessons that helped me find my way back to the surface. First of all, it's okay to call a man overboard when you are the one that's drowning. For years, I thought struggling in silence was my only option. But asking for help, that's you fighting to live. No one expects a drowning sailor out at sea to survive out in the open ocean, so why should we expect that in life? Second, it's okay to cling onto the life preservers thrown your way, whether it's a friend, a mentor, or even a therapist. Reaching out is survival. Life obviously didn't get easier overnight, but it became more bearable once I finally stopped fighting alone. And lastly, falling overboard does not define who you are. What you do next will. I thought my story was over, but it wasn't. I rebuilt, I found purpose, I began to help others. And I just want to leave you with this real quick. Even if a sailor isn't found immediately during the initial rescue efforts, the Navy continues their search days after the event. Every resource, every eye, every hand, still searching for you. Because every life is precious. And life in general, it's no different. Even when you feel lost at sea, people are always scanning the horizon for you. People care. And when someone's struggling, even when they feel invisible, there are people out there who would drop everything, who would fight through the raging waves, and who do absolutely anything to pull you back into safety. The ocean can be brutal, but help is out there. And sometimes the bravest thing that you can do is let the help reach you.